Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, and if people come in, that's fine. So you'll notice you're automatically muted when you join, and so we just do that because sometimes there's a lot of feedback, and that with background noise, it just makes it nice and crisp and clean if everyone's muted. But if you've never used GoToWebinar before, there's a little chat box below, and if you click on chat, you can type any questions that you have, and then I'm going to see that, and then I'll repeat that for everyone to hear, and then Liz can answer the question as we go along. So if you're ready to get started, just chat something in the box and let me know that you can definitely hear me, and we'll get started.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Pashley. I'm the Volunteer Engagement Manager at Best Friends in Los Angeles. And today I'm going to chat with you about how to start a neonatal foster program. So a little bit about me. One of the things that I think is really great to point out is that I started out as a volunteer, just like I'm sure many of you have, and many of the people who currently work in animal welfare have at some point worked in a volunteer capacity. So I actually started in Boston at the Animal Rescue League of Boston, and that's where I really started to learn a lot about cats. Prior to that, honestly, I knew very little about cats. So all of the knowledge that I've gained has been from working with animal rescues, which has been really, really great. And I've even volunteered locally with Heaven on Earth, and I worked with them for a year doing some cat behavior work for them. I started getting involved with Best Friends Animal Society in July of 2013. I was hired as an adoption specialist right when our NKLA Center opened, although I was up in the Mission Hills location. And then about a year or so later, I took over the foster program. I was the sole foster coordinator for a year, and then we gained a second foster coordinator. And between the two of us, we typically send out 1,500 to 1,700 kittens into foster every single year. And then most recently, I became the volunteer engagement manager. So now I oversee not only the foster program, but all of our Los Angeles volunteer programming. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of the things that I learned about creating foster programs with you guys today. So the first thing that I'd love to talk about is why it's needed and why it's a great thing to think about starting a neonatal kitten foster program, particularly in Los Angeles, but even across the United States. And that's simply because, as we know, neonatal kittens are one of the key demographics in need of rescue. Kittens under 8 weeks of age are at risk for euthanasia in most city municipal animal shelters, and that's because they require around-the-clock care, which a lot of places aren't able to provide. But the really great thing is that foster programs are super easy to start. They're pretty easy to maintain, and they can be scaled depending upon what the size of your organization is. So you can easily start a foster program with the goal of rescuing 5 kittens or a litter of kittens, or maybe your goal for the year is to rescue 10 litters of kittens. And you don't have to start with 1,500 kittens. We certainly didn't. This is something that has been increasing over the years as we've been developing our program. The other great piece about it is that people absolutely love saving kittens. It's an easy sell for them. They love taking care of kittens because they're adorable. You get to see them grow up. And then, of course, once these kittens get to 2 months of age, they're actually one of the easiest demographics to adopt out. So as long as you can get them through that initial growth period until we can spay neuter them, after that, finding placement for them it usually doesn't take too long. So today, a few things that we'll cover. So the first part is how to actually set up a foster program. What are some of the things that you need to think about and get in place before you go ahead and start rescuing kittens? The second part is going to be talking about maintaining your program, really making sure that you are working with the fosters to develop them and make sure that your program stays successful in the long term. And then lastly, I'm just going to give some quick tips on how you can easily just start your program right after this webinar. So we're going to go into that. The first part of setting up your program. So there are a few things that you do have to think about before you actually get started. Some of this stuff you may already think about, you know, when you're rescuing adult cats and adult dogs, you may have some of this stuff already in place, but it is important to take another look at it and make sure that you have this stuff for neonatal kittens. And those are things like supplies, medical care. So how are these kittens going to get vaccines, spay, neuter, all of that. You also need to think about the foster timeline. How long are we expecting these kittens to be in a foster home until they find a permanent adopted home? And then, of course, how are you going to actually get fosters? How are you going to get them trained to be fosters? And how are you going to offer them support through this process? So the first part, supplies, obviously this is the very, very basic list of supplies. But when you're thinking about bottle babies, you know, things that bottle babies need is very different from things that say weaned kittens, or if you're rescuing a mom and kittens that they need. So bottle babies, we need formula, we need bottles, we need some sort of heat source, and then I always recommend a gram scale for keeping track of their weight. If you aren't fostering out bottle babies, then of course you don't necessarily need those supplies. But for any kittens, wet food, dry food, some sort of carrier, whether that's a plastic one or a cardboard carrier to get them to and from their vet appointments. And of course, litter boxes and non-clumping litter. So that's the basics, right? That's everything that we need for a cat to be a cat. But of course, there are additional things. We want kittens to have toys to play with, blankets to cuddle with, bowls for their food. The great thing is that a lot of these things are the additional ones are things that you don't necessarily have to provide to a foster. They may have a lot of these things at home. So for instance, if a foster needs bowls, I'll usually say, just grab a Tupperware for your water, or you know, look and see what you have, spare bowls and plates that might be lying around. I would say the greatest additional supply that we tend to lend out the most in our program are the crates and the playpens. And that is because those can be really useful additional tools that people don't necessarily have laying around. So of course, then the question comes, where are these supplies actually coming from? Who's providing them? So some of these things might be things that you are buying for animals in your care. So if you have food that you're already using for cats and dogs, you may be able to use, you know, some of that cat food for your neonatal kittens. And of course, fosters are often willing to buy stuff themselves. There are certainly other rescues that have programs that ask the fosters to buy all of the supplies for their kittens. The nice thing about that is that if they do, and you are a registered nonprofit organization, they can actually claim those things as in-kind donations to your organization. So they are tax-deductible purchases. Of course, for us, it was really important to be able to provide as much as possible to our fosters. And the great thing has been that we can actually get fosters who are, you know, really willing to help kittens, but don't necessarily have the financial ability to purchase food, to purchase litter. And so if you are able to provide that stuff, it certainly opens up, you know, the people who can participate in your program. And then, of course, you can always ask for donations by the public. Here at Best Friends, we do host a kitten shower event every year before kitten season gets started. It's partially for our on-site kitten nursery to get supplies, but a lot of those supplies also go into our foster program. So you could easily host an event asking for supplies for kittens. It's, again, really, really easy for people to want to donate supplies for kittens. So for the actual kitten shower, that's something, like I said, we host once a year. We have our Amazon wish list of items that we really need. A lot of it is the more expensive kitten supplies. So KMR formula, heating pads, heating discs, some blankets, the actual kitten baby bottles. And people bring them to the actual event. We have, some food, some games. We also sell some t-shirts and things like that. So we try to make it more of a party atmosphere. And instead of people purchasing a ticket to this event, we ask that they bring a donation. And part of that too is we also give them a tour of our kitten nursery, which if you don't have a kitten nursery on site, that's fine. I'm sure you can have other things to kind of show them and get them involved in your organization. And honestly, we get the vast majority of the supplies that we need for the year out of this one event. In likelihood, though, this will very often be a combination of all three different things. So we do purchase some things, we have a lot donated, and then of course our fosters do purchase some things on their own. The other thing that you do need to think about is the medical. So when kittens come in, are they going to get an initial intake exam? I certainly recommend it just to see what their status is when you get them. And then, of course, the vaccination schedule. The FERCP vaccine is the main vaccine for kittens. They need to be given to kittens every 2 to 3 weeks. We do it every 2 weeks because our kittens are being exposed more to a shelter environment. If you're more of a kind of foster-based organization, you may be able to space that out a little bit more, but I would recommend all kittens to have at least 3 vaccines under their belt by the time they're getting adopted out. And then, of course, deworming. Kittens are really, really good at having worms. That's probably the #1 thing that I see time and time again that can cause a lot of digestive upset. And preventatively deworming them can really make a huge difference, whether they have roundworms or tapeworms. And then, of course, thinking about spay-neuter. So at what point are you spaying and neutering them? And who is going to provide that? So you may already have a network of vets and vet clinics that you work with to provide medical care for other animals in your organization, or you may be a physical facility that has an actual on-site clinic. Of course, the more kittens that you take in, the more spay neuter they need. So it is important to kind of really think about volume and how you're able to get all of the kittens spayed and neutered in a timely fashion. So I do recommend them getting that done before they're actually turned over to an adopter. And then, of course, who covers the cost? So routine things, and then, of course, emergencies. Emergencies, as we know, is the thing that can kind of drive up the costs, our medical costs. But we do need to have a plan in place in case these kittens do get super sick while they're in our care. They are neonatal animals, so they do not have fully developed immune systems, so they are more prone to, developing bacterial infections, viral infections, if they've been exposed to these things while they're at the city shelter or even while they're in our own care. And then, of course, dealing with sick kittens and those emergencies. I will say that the more trained your fosters and staff are in neonatal kitten care, the less of a risk that it is. So that's being able to tell if a kitten is having diarrhea, if they seem dehydrated, make sure that we're tracking their eating habits. And that's where, weighing them daily can really make a huge difference. So the more that you're able to develop your fosters and your staff, the less likely you'll run into these emergency situations, which will end up costing a lot. And then, of course, understanding our own limitations, right? There are kittens that are born with birth defects, congenital defects, that they have really bad immune systems, and so they might catch something and they go downhill really, really quickly, or succumb to fading kitten syndrome. So, of course, we want to give all of the kittens in our care the absolute best chance of survival. But we also need to understand kind of the cost analysis of this. What can we do to really try to support this kitten, and at what point should we really kind of consider our own limitations? So that's always something you should have just in the back of your mind when you're thinking about this. And then, of course, once we figured out those back-end pieces, then we actually want to set up our program by recruiting fosters. Foster recruitment, honestly, is pretty easy. You just have to ask. Social media is a great place to get started. Or if you have current volunteers with your organization, asking them, hey, would you like to try some neonatal kittens? Even if they've previously only ever fostered dogs for you guys. You can say, hey, all it requires is you to set up a bathroom in your home, and let's give you some weaned kittens for a couple weeks, and let's give it a try. A lot of people will be willing to help you out and see how it goes. And honestly, once they get started fostering kittens, a lot of people get hooked and want to keep doing it. And then, of course, you can also reach out to your community with more targeted marketing, put up flyers in your local vet clinics, pet stores, things like that. We've certainly recruited a few fosters by having some posters up. When you are talking to the public or your own volunteers and asking for them to be fosters, it is important to be very open and transparent about what you're actually asking them to do. So what are your needs? We need you to foster neonatal kittens, moms and kittens, or maybe you really want to focus on bottle babies. We need you to be able to take them to their vaccine appointments, to have medical care, and we're expecting you to have these kittens for a set amount of time. And then, of course, also let them know how they can get started right away. So if you have them hooked in with an adorable photo of a kitten, say, hey, like, call this number to get started. You always want to have that action item for people if you're asking for their help. Cute videos, cute photos always help attract people, and luckily kittens are really, really good at taking cute photos. So certainly share that far and wide. Instagram is a really great place to share super cute kitten photos. And then, of course, always have the ask alongside those. We've also had a lot of success with foster recruitment events, specifically one called Save the Kittens, which we did last year in partnership with LA Animal Services. We've also done a version of that on our own called Clear the Nursery. And that's where we say, hey, we have this huge, huge need for kitten fosters. Come in on this day between this time, even if you've never interacted with our organization before, and come and learn about fostering kittens. Especially if you physically have kittens there, that's a huge draw for people. People want to come and see the kittens, and then you can talk to them, engage with them. A lot of times you'll end up sending them home with kittens. We do a day event that is really only like 4 or 5 hours long. It's not a huge amount of time, and we easily send 30 kittens into foster care each time we do this event. And a lot of those fosters will then continue fostering even after that event. So we're getting that long-term commitment from people who, you know, might be more impulsive about the decision to start fostering. And then, of course, we really want to think about how do our fosters literally get started. It might be good to have some sort of orientation where you talk to them about your philosophy, let them know about your organization, and of course, let them know about the process of fostering. We used to do our orientations in person. We've since switched to a video format. So we actually just have a foster orientation. It's on YouTube. We send that to anyone who inquires about fostering with us. They watch it, they answer a few questions, and then we have them sign our foster agreement. For us, it's really important to remove any potential hoops to get started, which is why we don't require home checks of our fosters. We don't even necessarily ask them a ton of information about their home or if they have a ton of other pets at home. Really, it's about us communicating what we're expecting of them. Like, we expect you to have a space available, a safe space available in your home for these kittens. We expect you to provide this type of care. And as long as they, can communicate that that is something that they're able to commit to, then we say, yep, absolutely, let's get you started. And for us, it's really important too that we're a little bit of a matchmaking service. So if someone's a brand new foster and they're a little nervous about taking home kittens, I'll usually try to pair them up with like the easy, happy, playful kittens to get them started. Or if they're really, really excited to take home bottle babies, I want to make sure if it's their first time that, I'm sending them with ones that I think will be successful and do well. So, if a foster is like, you know what, I only want weaned kittens, I'm not going to try to sell them on a bottle baby because I don't want to overwhelm them. I want them to enjoy the experience so that they come back later and keep fostering over and over again. Maybe a few fosters down the line, I can say, hey, why don't we try a bottle baby this time? Let's see if we can challenge you this time. But that's only after they've, been hooked and they have the fostering bug. So then, of course, we do absolutely want to make sure that we're setting clear expectations with these fosters. And that's why we have a foster agreement. So this is a legal document that they sign, essentially saying that they understand that they are participating in our program, that all of the animals they're fostering still legally belong to us, that they agree to, provide them good care, that they're going to bring them in for their vaccines and medical appointments, and of course that if for some reason we are, anything would happen in their home, that we're not liable for that. So after this, we will absolutely send you guys the documents. So we can send you our foster agreement so you can actually take a look at the wording and exactly what we're telling our fosters. This is also a great place to agree on a general timeline for fostering. So how often these kids need to get vaccinated, when we're expecting them to get spayed and neutered. And of course, it's really, really important to always be emphasizing contact information. I would say anytime I'm talking to a foster, that is the stuff that I go over the most, even more so than just general kitten care. I'm like, this is our phone number, this is our email, this is exactly how you get in contact with us, because that's the most important piece of this, right? Because they're in their homes, they're separate from us, we're always communicating either by phone or email. So that is, if they don't remember anything else, that is the most important piece of information. And then, of course, scheduling an actual pickup or one-on-one. For us, since we have a physical kitten nursery, we're scheduling them to come to our kitten nursery and pick up their kittens there. And that's a point where we can have that physical face-to-face with them. We get a chance to start the relationship with the fosters, go over all the basics of kitten care. We can handle the kittens in front of them and show them things. So say if the kitten is having a little bit of diarrhea, we can actually show them what it looks like, things to look out for. We can look at other kittens and show them examples as well. That may not be possible for you if you're sending, say, fosters to a city shelter to pick them up, but you can always arrange for a phone call to talk them through the process before they get started. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the timeline is a really, really important piece of this, because this is really what's setting the foundation and of the expectations. So every time that we send out a litter of kittens into foster, not only do we want to make sure that they know exactly which kittens they have, we also microchip any kittens over 4 weeks when they go to foster so that we can keep track of them that way. But we tell them exactly when the next vaccines are due, if they're currently on any medications or treatments, and then, of course, the kitten ends up getting sick, they might take longer in foster, they might just grow really slow. kittens through 8 weeks. All right, sorry about that. So it is really important. So some people will, of course, take kittens as long as you'll let them have them, but some people don't have that time. Some people might be going out of town in 4 weeks, but that doesn't mean you can't utilize them as a foster volunteer. So usually we will ask people to commit to at least 2 weeks with kittens. That can also be a huge sell for bottle babies, right? Because they're the ones that take the most time. They have to be fed around the clock. And so instead of saying, you're going to have this kitten for 8 weeks, because that can sometimes freak people out. I mean, we know that as kittens get older, their care actually gets easier. But saying, hey, you know what, just commit to 2 weeks. If after 2 weeks you want to keep fostering them longer, that's great. Let us know. If after 2 weeks you want to give them back, that's great. You've got them through the phase of being a bottle baby. You got them to their next age range. And that's something to celebrate. And then, of course, we could always just transfer them to a different foster home if they're not quite ready. Something to think about too is potentially having a group of fosters who will coordinate together. That's something you can absolutely think about. If people are hesitant to take, say, bottle babies for a full 2 weeks, you could say, hey, if you want to partner up with this foster, maybe you take it for 1 week, that foster takes it for the other week, and you guys can coordinate the transfer of the kitten back and forth. That's always a possibility. It's just important for you to know who is taking care of that kitten. So making sure you have everybody's contact information who's involved in the care. So you just write out all that information. And of course, you'll notice on the document on the screen that, again, we're super emphasizing our contact information as the most important information. And that includes our emergency foster line, which I'll get into in a little bit. That being said, sometimes you're still going to have unplanned returns. It happens. People have emergencies. Someone might take a bottle baby thinking they can do it, and a few days later they're freaking out. That's okay, and I think it's really important to approach that with a sense of empathy, because it's not for everybody, and we at least want to acknowledge that they gave it a try. But we still want to make sure that, we have a plan for emergency return. So if it's a last minute notice, okay, well, who can we pass this kitten along to? Or is there a place where we can put this kitten for, a few hours, 24 hours until we figure out the next person who can come get them? For us, again, we have the benefit of having a physical kitten nursery, so we can have our fosters return them to the nursery temporarily. But you might not have that option, and so it might be great to have some kind of emergency foster backups who are willing to take kittens even for 24 to 48 hours while you coordinate another home. And then the last piece, and this is probably, this is a big thing that comes up, is when will the fosters actually say goodbye to these kittens? That can be really difficult for fosters to do because they get very attached to the kittens. So it's a good idea to make this decision up front. For us, we say once you return these kittens for spay neuter, that is it. They return for spay neuter, and then we place them up for adoption in our adoption center. Or if you don't have a physical facility, you could say, hey, you are keeping these kittens until they get adopted, which of course is more fluid, and we might not have an exact timeline for that. But as long as you've set that expectation up front, then they know, okay, I'm keeping it until it gets adopted. So that there's no confusion when the time comes. It is also important to keep a track of animals in your care. You probably, if you have adult animals, you probably have some sort of tracking system already in place. And the great thing is that you can easily just repurpose this for neonatal fosters. So Pet Point has a foster care activity setting in it. Shelter Love also has some foster things where you can at least say that an animal is in a particular person's home. However, if you don't use any of these animal softwares, you can actually just create your own spreadsheet. So this one on our screen, I just did a very, very quick mock-up. As long as you know who the person is, what their contact information is. It's a good idea to keep some sort of notes as to the foster. So maybe this foster really only likes taking weaned kittens, and maybe they don't want to take more than 3 kittens at a time. Maybe you have a really, really excellent bottle baby foster and you want to make a note of that for the future. It's a great thing to have that information recorded. And then, of course, listing all of the animals that they have, when their vaccines are due, and then if there's any other sort of adoption plans, spay neuter plans. But even a very simple spreadsheet is all you need to get started. And then, of course, sometimes we can run into more difficult situations with our fosters. So one of the things that can happen is non-compliant fosters. So these are fosters who are either struggling to return their kittens into your care when you ask them to, or maybe these are fosters who aren't taking their kittens to vaccines, who aren't bringing them into the vet. And so you suddenly have a 2-month-old kitten that isn't vaccinated. In the case of these fosters, it's just important to emphasize what your policy is, and you can reference back to the foster agreement. So that's why having a foster agreement is really important, because you can say, hey, you signed this, this is what you agreed to. If you are unable to, say, take your kitten to a vaccine appointment, we understand, but we're going to have to transfer these kittens to a different home if you're not able to do what we're asking you to do. And then for non-communicative fosters, so these are fosters that you've reached out to, you're trying to check up on them, they're not answering your emails, they're not answering your phone calls. This happens once in a great while for us as well. For this, we just use a general contact log sheet. So we are calling them up to 3 times a day for 3 days. Oftentimes, if you start this process, and all you have to say is, hey, how's it going? Just wanted to check in with you. Please call me back as soon as possible. You don't have to, make it too concerning of a voicemail or anything like that. Usually by day 2, they're calling you back. And then you can have the conversation of, hey, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. Is there anything you need help with? Let's make sure that we're getting you back on track. It's always important in these cases to set a deadline. That's sort of their action item. So you say, hey, I noticed that your kittens haven't had their vaccines, they're overdue. Make sure you schedule something by the end of this weekend. And that usually kind of gives them, the ultimatum, and make sure that they follow through on their end. But also try to offer solutions. So maybe there's something going on in their lives where they've kind of had to put that commitment on the back burner. They're still taking care of the kittens, but they just can't transport them around. If that's the case, say, oh my goodness, let me see if I can find someone who can pick up your kittens and take them to the vaccine. So you always want to at least try to work with people. Ultimately, if they're just not able to participate in the way that you need them to participate, you can decide, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing for you. Maybe next time we'll say no if you're interested in fostering. In some ways, the harder things to deal with fosters is actually the loss of foster kittens. This is where it's really important for us to be really empathetic and compassionate towards our foster volunteers, because they're the ones that have had these animals in their care. And oftentimes are very attached to them. And so even if they fostered for you for years, that first kitten that happens to not make it or not thrive can really be very difficult for them. So one of the things that I do sometimes explain to people if they're interested in it, some people just need some time and some space, but I've had a lot of people sort of respond well to the explanation of kind of how kittens come to exist, So cats are one of those animals that they do breed quantity. So they are, having kittens after kittens after kittens. And so naturally, not all of them are, well made. So we have, it's been actually really interesting working in a nursery where we have thousands of kittens come through every year, you know, because we have some kittens that make it to spay neuter, and then our vet realizes, oh, this kitten actually only has one kidney, or this kitten has a really bad heart murmur. And it's, you know, you got to imagine all of the kittens that just don't make it to that age, but were born with these very serious conditions. Of course, if for some reason a kitten does pass in a foster home, regardless of whether it was, you know, a birth defect, if it was a bacterial infection, viral infection, as much as we, you know, want to express our empathy and our compassion, it is important to follow up with the foster and suggest some type of cleaning protocol, follow up with them, ask them how they're doing, but make sure that, especially if you're suspicious of a disease, that they disinfect their foster area before they take more kittens. And I know a lot of groups, you know, can sometimes panic about more serious viral infections like panleukopenia and things like that. For us, if our fosters have that in their home, we have a very comprehensive cleaning protocol, which again, we can share with you after this webinar. Once they've done it, they can take more kittens. And we usually don't have any issues with that. So as long as they've cleaned everything thoroughly, we don't necessarily have to worry so much about sending more kittens into their homes. So they can, you know, get started with more kittens if they want to within a couple weeks. And then the last piece is helping our foster volunteers let go at the time of adoption. That can sometimes almost be the hardest part. I've had more fosters cry in front of me because their kittens are ready for adoption than anything else. And it's important to kind of phrase it in a very celebratory fashion. You know, congratulate them for getting their kittens to adoption age. If you are able to get adoption photos, feel free to share them with your fosters. Share those happy stories, because that really will make them feel so much better if they can get, you know, even one photo of their foster kitten in their new home. That being said, of course, our goal is to, you know, protect our adopters as well. If adopters and fosters want to share contact information and stay in touch, that's fantastic. If an adopter really doesn't, though, all we can do is say, hey, you know, our foster would love to hear from you. This is their contact information that they've offered, but it's entirely up to you if you want to reach out to them. If you don't, we completely understand. And then the last piece, of course, is to think about when you would dismiss a foster volunteer. I will say that for having hundreds of foster volunteers in our program, we maybe dismiss one a year. And that's because our foster volunteers are fantastic. I love them all, to be honest. But things that would qualify a foster volunteer for dismissal would be things like, you know, concern about the level of care that they're giving their kittens. So if you don't think that they're, you know, if they might be neglecting their kittens, if you don't think that they're capable of giving them the level of care that we need them to. And then it's usually for non-compliance. So not bringing them in for vaccines, not bringing them in for spay neuter, not getting in contact with us. If that's, you know, a chronic thing, then we might decide, hey, we don't think that this program is right for you. And then, of course, maintaining our program. So when we are following up with our fosters, again, it's really important to keep in mind that they're in their houses and we are in our offices. So we're doing all of our communication by phone or email. So with that, we have various types of communication that we do with our fosters. The first one, of course, is the please. So we need you to come rescue these kittens, or we need people to take more or to do more for us. We do a combination of a weekly email where we highlight all of the kittens in our nursery that need to be fostered out, and then personal asks. Personal asks are especially useful if it's a more urgent situation. So say there's a kitten currently at the city shelter that needs rescuing in the next couple hours. It's probably worth your time to go through your spreadsheet of fosters, see who doesn't currently have kittens or who might have capacity for a couple more. Get them on the phone and just do that personal ask. It takes a little bit longer, but you're more likely to get a response faster. And a lot of people respond really well to personal asks because they know that you are reaching out to them specifically for their help. So most of the time, you know, they'll say yes unless they literally cannot help you. We also like to do check-ins. So even if we haven't heard from fosters in a while, especially newer fosters who might need a little bit of extra guidance, we want to send them an email, you know, maybe after the first 24 hours, maybe it's within the first week, just saying, hey, just wanted to see how everything's going. And that just reminds them again that you are there. If they have any questions, if they need anything, it gives you a chance to just make sure that everybody is well and the kittens are growing and doing well. We also send out vaccine reminders. So even though we do put it on the foster to schedule their own vaccine appointments, if they're overdue, we'll send them a quick reminder email. Saying, hey, just let you know your kids are due for vaccines. This is how you set up your appointment. And we have a canned response for that. So we don't have to personalize them. We literally just once a week go through, see who's overdue for vaccines, and we send them all the same reminder email, just having them on BCC. Emergency communication is really, really important. For that, we utilize a Google Voice number, and this is our emergency phone line. We give out this number anytime a foster volunteer picks up new animals. We also have it in our email signature as well. And what's great about Google Voice as an option is because you can set it up for free and you can connect different people's cell phone numbers to it. So you're not giving out your personal cell phone number to these foster volunteers, you're giving them out a generic number, and you can actually switch off on your staff as to who's answering the line. If you're a smaller organization, you could even potentially set up volunteers to be the ones handling those emergencies. So there's a lot of options if you have, say, a Google Voice number versus giving out your personal contact information. And then, of course, pickups and returns. We do this automatically through an appointment system, Digital Cheetah. You could also potentially do this through Google Calendar or something else, or just one-off through email. Find a date and a time and make a note of it so that everybody's on the same page. And then, of course, timeliness really does matter, especially if it has something to do with medical. Even if you don't have an answer, even if you need to spend the day coordinating a vet appointment with your offsite vets, if you email back your foster saying, hey, I'm gonna figure this out for you, I'll get back to you by the end of the day, that can really calm a lot of people down instead of them feeling like they're not getting any answers from you. So we have it so that most of our foster volunteers get some type of email response within 24 hours. It's often within a couple hours. And again, even if it's to say, hey, I'm figuring this out, I'll let you know as soon as I have an answer. That just shows that, you know, you're proactive, that you're on their side, that you're making sure that you're getting any resources that they need available. And then, of course, it is important to not only develop your relationships with your foster volunteers, but also prevent burnout. So again, with that spreadsheet, you can take notes about what their foster preferences are. You can also track their performance management. So if you know you've had an issue with a foster volunteer before, maybe they weren't great about setting up their vaccine appointments, you can then talk to them next time when they pick up kittens and re-emphasize you know, the importance of them getting their vaccines. And then continue training and education. This is the really great part because you get to take all of the knowledge that you know from animal welfare and teach it to your foster volunteers. Our foster volunteers absolutely love it when we have training opportunities for them. So things like teaching them how to bottle feed. So in the beginning of the kitten season, when we have a lot of bottle babies, what we'll do is we'll set up opportunities for fosters to come in, see us bottle feed kittens, we'll do a demonstration with them, and then if they feel comfortable, we'll send bottle babies home with them to foster. But it's more of like a see what it's like, find out more about what's entailed with bottle feeding kittens. As soon as they realize that it's actually pretty easy to bottle feed kittens, most of them will be on board to get started and take them home. Doing medical presentations, so teaching them more about ringworm, more about panleukopenia, more about calicivirus. All of these things can be really, really useful for them to know as they grow. And then, of course, developing their skills to take on new challenges. So that's things like, can we teach our foster volunteers to be able to do subcutaneous fluids at home? Can we teach them to take a kitten's temperature? Can we teach them to, consistently trim their kitten's nails so that they get used to that? All of these things are really developing our fosters and making sure that they become the most useful fosters they can possibly be. To the point where we can just send them home with kittens and not have to worry about it. They just reach out to us if they have any questions. It's always important to talk with your fosters, ask how they're doing, and be interested in their lives outside of being a foster volunteer. One of my favorite foster volunteers to talk to is this retired lady who periodically fosters kittens, and then in between fostering kittens, she travels. She goes to Egypt, she goes to Africa, she goes on all these really cool trips, and so every time she comes in, she's showing me photos from the last trip that she went on. And it's great because she loves it. She loves fostering our kittens, but she also, really appreciates the fact that she can do it when she's available, and then when she wants to go on a trip or vacation or do something else with her life, that we're totally fine with her taking a break. And then, of course, we always want to make sure that we are advocates for our foster volunteers. So if you notice that a foster volunteer had a particularly difficult group of kittens, maybe they had a kitten who passed away, maybe it was really difficult for them to return their kittens for adoption, that we pay attention to that and we recognize that, and maybe we say, hey, let's maybe take a break for a few weeks, and then, in a couple weeks, if we have more kittens in need of rescue, we'll reach out to you then. I always think it's really, really important to never guilt our fosters into taking animals, even if we have a kitten who's like in immediate need of rescue. If you ask a volunteer and they're like, I don't know, I have a lot going on right now, say, okay, not a problem. I will go ahead and reach out to someone else and see if they're available. And that's because it's really important to invest in our foster volunteers so that they're fostering for us for years. A lot of our fosters, they've been fostering for us now for 4 or 5 years. And it's because, we really give them that support. And of course, when we are sending them out with kittens who are a bit more challenging, whether behaviorally, medically, make note of that, because those are the fosters that we may need to check in with more often, or send them more resources or guidance. And then, of course, the best part is our appreciation. And there are very, very easy, cheap ways to appreciate our foster volunteers. Most of them are doing it without, needing any appreciation. A lot of them just do it out of the goodness of their own hearts. But at the end of every kitten season, I usually will handwrite thank you cards for every single kitten foster. We get our staff to sign them and send them out. We also love posting foster updates onto our bulletin board so that everybody else can kind of recognize the work that our fosters are doing for us. And then once a year, we do host an appreciation party. It's not a super expensive event. We do invest a couple $100s for food and a few decorations. But our fosters absolutely love kind of connecting with each other and, meeting the staff and getting a chance to, just appreciate each other and all the work that we've done throughout the year. So we usually do that in the winter time when things are a little slower and we have the time to actually, get everybody together. And then another thing that we do when we send out our weekly foster email is we do a foster of the week. So we do a shout out to whoever has been helping us the most this past week. Maybe it's a foster who went out of their way to accommodate a kitten or just did a really great job getting their kittens ready for adoption. So we do want to recognize that. Depending upon the size of your program, you don't necessarily have to do it on a weekly basis. It could be a monthly basis if you have a smaller group of foster volunteers. But I'll say even something as simple as that, I've had foster volunteers who, were really stressed out, and then we had them be the foster of the week, and they respond to us. They're like, oh my God, this was fantastic. I really was like having a bad week, but this really kind of set me, set me in a positive mind, and I'm good now. And that's simply because we thanked them for their hard work. And then, of course, we do want to develop a community of foster volunteers. So we do have a Facebook group for our fosters to be able to communicate with each other. We also recommend taking the time to introduce them to other staff, other volunteers. If they're coming in to pick up kittens, say, hey, let me introduce you to so-and-so. And that's because our foster volunteers just want that sense of community, which is a little harder to develop when they're in their own homes. And of course, share our success stories. So if we had maybe a particularly sick kitten, kitten who had really stubborn ringworm, but they got better, make sure that we're celebrating the hard work that people put into to get those kittens to adoption. So the last piece of this is just some tips on how you can take this information, which I realized was a lot of information to go over. So with all of that stuff in mind, how can you just get started? What can you do right now to start developing your foster program? So the first piece is to create whatever documents you need in order to get started. So that's things like the foster agreement and the foster plan. Those are probably the two main ones that you need to get started. So you do want to create these documents, but you also don't need to go crazy and create everything from scratch. We'll be sending out these materials to you after this webinar, so you can take a look. Feel free to copy and paste what you want. All of it is up for grabs. Just delete our name, stick your name on it if you'd like to, and therefore you have that ready to go. The other piece is to really kind of take a look at what your organization can take on. So we're not expecting you to suddenly start fostering out 1,500 kittens a year. Think, okay, well, let me see how many foster volunteers I can recruit. Let me have a goal of recruiting 10 foster volunteers, and we'll see between those 10 volunteers how many kittens we can rescue. Or it might be, hey, I'd really like to rescue 100 kittens this year, and pace yourself out that way. As long as you have a solid foundation for your program in place, you can then scale it up as high as it needs to go. So don't feel like you have to have, everything figured out right away. We certainly didn't have everything figured out when we got started. But I think a lot of these tips and tools will kind of get you going well. And then, of course, get people excited. People are always excited for foster programs because kittens are adorable. So make sure that you emphasize anybody who needs to be involved in this process. Talk about the importance of making a difference and really kind of focusing on some of these animals that need the most help in our shelter system. And then finally, plan for kitten season. So kitten season can vary depending upon where you live, but certainly here in Los Angeles, it's the majority of the year. So we typically see kittens from March through November. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of kittens that we have to try to get into foster homes. However, there are a couple months where there are not or very few kittens in the system. And it's almost amazing to see those 2 months when we don't have kittens, we still have fosters begging us for kittens. So we have gotten to a point where we actually have to put our fosters on a wait list and say, hey, we don't have kittens. We're not gonna have kittens for a couple months. We'll keep you in mind. And we just, as kittens come in at the beginning of the season, we just go down the line and contact our fosters and kind of get them going for the season. And these are people who maybe fostered 4 or 5 litters the past year. A lot of our fosters, once they get hooked, they want to keep going and going and going. We also have fosters who foster once and then never foster again, and that's totally fine as well. Any contribution they can make is really helpful. So I would much rather, put in the work to get that person to foster one time than turn them away, because every single home and every single foster makes a difference. If you need a few more additional resources on starting a foster program, here are 3 main ones that are super fantastic. The National Kitten Coalition has a whole manual on starting a kitten nursery as well as foster programming. Kitten Lady has a lot of YouTube videos. So these are really, really great videos to share with fosters. Even if you don't know that information, you know, it has information on how to bottle feed, how to transition your kittens onto gruel, how to treat tiny kittens for fleas. So there's a lot of really good stuff that you can share without having to recreate that information. And then of course, Maddie's Fund. Maddie's Fund has a ton of resources online for neonatal kittens. So if you personally are not as experienced with neonatal kittens, you can go on there and learn a lot of information. They have some fantastic webinars. They have other references on, you know, how much you need to feed kittens, what their weights should be. So I definitely recommend checking out these extra resources. And that is about it. That's all the information that I have. Obviously, if you guys have additional questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I have my email address up there. I also listed the email address of our foster team as well as our volunteer team. So you guys are always welcome to reach out to us if you need any extra information.
Hey guys, since it's only 2 of you on here, we'll go ahead and let you ask some questions. So I'll unmute you one by one. So we'll start with Jane. Jane, do you have any questions for Liz while we have her?
Yes. And thank you very much for this seminar. It was great.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you can hear me. I forgot I was typing.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was wondering if, or how do you keep track of the kitten's medical care? I mean, do you constantly contact the fosters to do that, or do you have them update a Google Doc, or how do you keep track of when they've gotten the vaccines done or something?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for us, the way that we're set up is that we have on-site vets. So we have them sign up for appointments with our veterinarians, and then that gets automatically put into our animal database system. But if you don't have that, what you can do is, like I said, on the spreadsheet that I showed, you can, if your goal is for every kitten before the age of 8 weeks to have 3 vaccines, you can see, okay, this kitten came to us, the city shelter already did a vaccine. We'll know the approximate date that we want them to get their 2nd vaccine, their 3rd vaccine. So around that date, you can email the foster, call the foster, say, hey, we need to schedule this, and you can schedule it, you know, however you want that done, and then just request the vaccine information for them.
Okay.
You can keep that all on a Google Drive if you use Google Drive. You can keep paper copies. There's a lot of different options for that. You just want to have kind of that spreadsheet so that you know when to remind your fosters.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anything else before we go on to Patty?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jane. Okay, Patty. Any questions?
No, thanks.
Patty, you're unmuted, so we can, oh, go ahead. No, you're good?
I'm good. Thank you. Lots of notes. Thanks.
Oh. Wonderful.
All right. Thanks, guys, so much for attending. We really appreciate it. And we hope that this was useful and you got some good information from it. Again, if you think of additional stuff after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we're going to be sending you some of our physical documents to share with you guys. So you can also take a look at those and hopefully that will have even more information for you.
Yeah, and we'll also attach the recording because I recorded this webinar, so that way you can, you know, share it with your other members of your organization or your volunteers. And again, we'll attach those documents too. So thank you guys for joining us on this Saturday morning, and reach out if you have any questions.